Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today, we will be discussing holistic growth for your behavioral health organization with Growth Sherpa. I'm joined today with Steve and Chris from Growth Sherpa. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom if you're joining live. But if you are watching the recording, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll get back to you about it. As for a brief agenda, we'll first discuss introductions. We'll go over why tech stack is the foundation of growth, talking about some key components of a growth-oriented tech stack, why integration is the secret to scale, go over some trends, how to leverage your tech stack for optimization, and of course we'll do a Q&A at the end. Again, feel free to put your questions in the Zoom now, and we'll answer them as we go along, but we'll also do a specific section at the end for questions. Now, like I said before, I'm here with Steve and Chris from Growth Sherpa. Here at Opus, we were going to have Adi, who's our Vice President of Operations, but he was busy, so we just have myself, Sean Rickenbacker. Now, let's discuss the tech stack. So, tech stack is the foundation of growth. I know Chris and I have had lengthy conversations about CRM and various other parts of the tech stack, why building your organization and having that solid tech stack as a foundation is so important. But I'll turn the time over to Steve and Chris to discuss more.
Missions team, engaging with them with some of the tech options we have available there. And then it really allows you to build a more robust and precise patient acquisition strategy. So for me, and for GrowSharp in particular, we tend to usually start somewhere in the front end tech stack as far as our solutions, regardless of what the client I think initially wants, in mind is usually might be paid search or outreach, but if we can't track it, we don't know if it's effective. So that's where we really need to begin, is making sure we know how it's working.
And just to piggyback on that, there's from a digital marketing piece, from our perspective, just to add a little more commentary on what Steve said, is that, you want to make the most informed decision when it comes to high dollar marketing tactics like PPC. And the only way to do that is if you are measuring effectively. And the only way you can measure effectively is to have a really solid foundation in a MarTech stack. And it really takes the human bias, and it really takes a lot of those unknowns out of the equation when you're doing your marketing budget planning, when you want to see what's converting and what's not. And when we say conversion, we're not just talking about a click through, right? With a really solid MarTech stack, we can measure not just first touch, but all the way through admission. We can track what actually converts. So when I say conversion, I'm usually talking about an admission. And the only way to track that is with a super solid tech stack.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. As far as the key components of a growth-oriented tech stack, I know Chris and I had a lengthy conversation about that, but Chris, will you break that down for us?
Of course. In behavioral health, call is king. I know that the saying is content is king, but the call is king. That should not exclude things like chat and form fills, but we always want to track those calls. And you do that with dynamic call tracking systems like call rail or call tracking metrics. And what's so great about these platforms is that they measure multiple things around a phone call, right? They measure, let's say, Google Ads, right? If you integrate your Google Ads into your call tracking system, you can measure what keywords are generating calls, and you can put more dollars towards those keywords. You start getting keywords that are generating, maybe not such qualified leads, right? Well, now we can, make those negative keywords, right? So that's just kind of like the data piece, but also there's the admissions piece. You can start to measure how long call length, right? You can start to measure there are some really awesome, pieces of specifically call tracking metrics where their AI platform can measure the sentiment of the call, right? Just by listening. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do and apply it to your digital marketing. And then obviously, measuring something as basic as how many calls are being answered and more importantly, how many calls are not being answered. And tracking all that information is incredibly insightful to make more informed financial decisions in the future.
I
Yeah, if I
think
could pick that too, with that answer, I think nationally right now we're seeing 1/3 of calls missed for treatment centers, and so that having that information, if you're the national average right now, you can either say to yourself, I can keep pumping money into this call generating activity, or I can hire an admissions rep to pick up the phone and it's going to give me a 30% bump. That's pretty amazing. On the CRM side of things too, customer relationship management, that's obviously has a lot to do on the admission side of things, but for outreach and business development activities, the average rep in behavioral healthcare holds between 900 and 1,400 accounts in a regular territory. I don't care how smart or talented you can't keep that in your head. So CRMs really give the opportunity for the rep to quantify and keep track of A, B, C, and D level accounts, where to spend their time, how to spend their energy. And probably one of the biggest things that I get called in for over the last few years has been, how do I know if my reps are effective, right? And so for me, I have a formula I use. I'm going to quickly say it. It's a full long presentation, so we're not going to dig into it clearly, but it's activity times quality divided by time and distractions to the power of messaging equals output. Well, what I can actually quantify in a CRM is the activity and the quality, and I can very clearly see how many appointments they're having that I deem valuable and how quality are those that we as an organization deem valuable. And just being able to see that, you can pivot pretty quickly to higher quality if that's the issue. You can pivot to higher activity if that's the issue, and you can start making movement very quickly onto a rep's output. So doing that without a CRM, you can't. I mean, Excel spreadsheets and weekly reports aren't effective. So that's where I think the CRM is definitely wildly helpful for outreach oversight.
And just to add some additional commentary on this, Steve, we've talked about digital marketing, we've talked about business development, but there's also a third business unit within marketing that will use call tracking, that will use the CRM, that is probably the most cost-effective lead generation tool in behavioral health, and that is your alumni department.
Mhm.
When your alumni department can utilize your tech stack that exists on the front end, like your call tracking and your CRM, you are going to make leaps and bounds when it comes to lead generation, because alumni, I mean, those are your brand evangelists, right? Those are the ones that also generate the lowest cost per admission. And they're also an incredible source for content. But the only way to measure all of this is to make sure that your admissions team is really, trained in how to use call tracking systems, because you can also make outbound calls through a system like call tracking metrics. You can also do text messaging through a platform like call tracking metrics, and all of that information gets placed on that person's contact record in the CRM. So imagine that over 3 to 6 months, you have digital marketing, business development, and alumni, right? So start to finish, your behavioral health providing, right? That service you have start to finish. So what's happening is you're collecting an incredible amount of data on your user experience, and you tack on outcomes. There's so much incredible things that you can derive from this. So clearly, I'm getting super jazzed about this conversation already. But when you can get your digital marketing, your business development, and your alumni and outcomes all in this system together, it's absolutely incredible what a provider can accomplish.
awesome insights, you guys. I guess from just a marketing perspective, obviously, like a lot of that made sense, but to I guess somebody who's more on the business side, whether that be a provider, it's kind of like what isn't tracked isn't effective. Where if you aren't tracking all these metrics and seeing what's really working, you're not gathering that knowledge. I mean, to not to quote Mythbusters, but to quote Mythbusters, like the difference between science and goofing off is writing it down. And if you want your business to be a science or just goofing off, you got to write it down somewhere. So
Yeah, absolutely.
cool. Uh, moving on, kind of Chris and I discussed integration as being one of the main secrets to scaling. Obviously, we talked about the different parts of the tech stack, but making sure they uh, really connect. Um, Chris, will you go into a little bit more about those synergies, and Steve as well?
Absolutely. Getting someone into a new system is hard. It doesn't matter if it's marketing, if it's sales, if it's IT, if it's TA. Getting people to utilize new systems is difficult. And I want Steve to follow up with this statement. But you have to tell your associates and your employees when you're getting a new system, you have to tell them and show them how it benefits them.
Yeah. And I look at like this with integration as well. So years ago, well, after we had my daughter, my wife and I looked at each other about 6 months into it and said, "We are terrible at everything right now. We need some help." And so I know I can mow the lawn. I'm very good at mowing the lawn. I enjoy it, actually. I enjoy getting on there and listening to some Johnny Cash and getting after it on John Deere. But that's several hours every weekend that I'm not with my family, right? So the integration for me and my household was hiring Alex to come mow my lawn and take care of that on a weekly basis. And there's a small cost associated with that. But here's the benefit. It gets done perfectly every week. He lets me know when I need to fertilize, when I need to seed, when I need to weed, when things are going wrong in parts of it. Like I get communication back to me. I think that's the benefit of integration with partnership in our industry is a lot of our partners can do it. And actually, one of my first consulting responsibilities in behavioral health was for a Salesforce go live in particular years ago. That was massive, and everyone in that organization was more than competent enough to do that. But it helps having that person who's focused directly on making sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and then in many instances, being the person who comes back to your organization and says, we can't do this, or we can do this, or I need to train your team on this, or by the way, hey, team, you now need to do this. That arm's length is often very helpful in the integration. Um, and I think also setting up the dashboarding and reporting effectively is wildly important too for the integration so that right off the bat, you're getting information that you want to have quickly. In particular, I like to call them coffee reports. I like daily emailed reports at like 6 a.m. of the past day's data. So I can very quickly catch up and go, okay, I know what happened yesterday. I can move on with my day. So integration and making sure everything communicates, everything is giving you the data you want, and it's done in a way that's not distracting to your core business is probably paramount to the success of going live with some of these things.
I'll say this as well. So this is something that we see a lot with our customers. Having those integrations kind of keeps headaches away. If you've got data ecosystems that aren't seamlessly integrated and you're having to transfer that manually or even set up a third-party integration, suddenly this is an extra headache that you've got going on. And it's a lot of time taking away from your business, but also your patients. And it's time that your providers are having to take to transfer that data. So really having that integration increases your efficiency from a practice standpoint, but also, as it says here, the integration improves that marketing performance if you're able to get that data from the CRM to the EHR to your revenue cycle management platform, practice management, et cetera.
Yeah, and Sean, I'm sure you've seen this as well. I have two examples of that. First was with an engagement I had one time where they probably had about 25 to 30 outreach reps in the field, big digital campaigns, multi-locations. And the last day of the go live, I get the Excel spreadsheet before I have to push it into the system of all of their accounts, 80,000 lines. And I had to do the best I could that day to figure out who gets associated with what rep and where and by geographies and zip codes. And man, that was awful. That was a really bad day at work. But it got done and it didn't take someone who is really important running a business away from what they had to do. But it says in here operational clarity, and I really wanted to highlight a practical experience of that working with data in the CRM before. So the scenario was this. We had good front-end call system in place. We had a good CRM in place. We had data warehouse in place, and COVID hit. And prior to COVID, we knew it took about 4.13 phone calls per admission in our call center. And that was a reasonable number. And anything outside of like a half standard deviation of that was worth a cause of figuring out what's happening. 6 months later, we were at, I think, 5.3, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? It's 5.3 versus 4.13. But that was actually a census or a revenue drop of about $1 million a year. So yeah, that was a big deal. And because we had the data, we were able to go down each decision point and find out what was happening. And it turned out that it was based off of clinical denials. We were denying people clinically about 10% more than we normally were, which was causing this cascade to conversions. But operationally, because we were able to see that clinical, medical, admissions, outreach, and marketing, we're able to sit down into a room and say, hey, what's going on? What are we seeing? What are you seeing? Why are these people getting denied? Oh, there's more mental health complexity than before. It's early COVID, right? Now we're having more depression, anxiety, et cetera, coming out. So as an organization, we're able to make the decision of, okay, well, we're going to accept a higher acuity, but we're going to staff it this way, or we're going to do this process internally. So it wasn't just a revenue conversion standpoint. Because we had the right data in place, right systems, everything communicated, and we as a team communicated, that was able to provide us that little nudge back to that 4.13 target and back to that $1 million a year of revenue that was being lost, but also serving the patient properly, having the doctors and nurses and techs and staff where they need to be to handle what is now a more complex patient. So I'm a big fan of this. I know a lot of times I'll talk about the business side of things, but the business acumen and the altruism are really true wings on the same plane. And by using the data, you can actually leverage it to treat better, even though it seems like a front end activity.
You know, and also to kind of tack on a little bit about the employee experience, which is something that I think that, you know, all industries can definitely add more focus on, right? You know, are your people having a good time at work? And a lot of that can be derived from how much work do they do that is associated with their, you know, core competency. And a good example of this is if you've got a BD person, let's say, let me take a step back. You have not invested in solid integrations. All right. So as you mentioned, Sean, that you might have to pull from 5 different systems, you know, or 3 different systems to pull data. All right. That alone is probably 1 to 2 hours of work just pulling the data, making sure that it's accurate. Then that person might spend a half a day creating a dashboard that, because you're integrating it, you're putting more human input into it. There's, you know, likelihood for error increases significantly. So not only are you utilizing someone else's time for something that might not be as productive, but you're also kind of like throwing the dice on if it's accurate or not. So when you really invest up front in these integrations, there's a lot of downstream benefit that you don't see when you see that price tag. So one thing I want to say to people is that when you have the chance to invest in these integrations, invest heavily because they pay for themselves long term 10 times over.
Awesome. I really appreciate those insights from both of you, especially Steve, with the real world story you told about the tech stack synergy and operational clarity. Moving on, we'll talk a little bit about trends shaping behavioral health growth, especially in regards to like expansion across multiple facilities, how data affects that, and the digital experience. Steve and Chris, if you want to jump in about the trends that you've seen with your clients, prospective clients, et cetera.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and Chris, I'll leave that digital experience all the way to you. You're the expert there. I'm gonna start with the role of data in attracting investment. Prior lives, I would be involved in reviewing deal decks for potential acquisition or investments from the organizations I worked at, and the biggest frustration I had with my component in that process was not having any understanding of how they were getting revenue. And it was organizations all across the country, all sizes, that had no to poor visibility to any of the KPIs on the front end, patient or revenue generation side of things. It makes it incredibly difficult to invest in an organization if you don't know how they're getting their revenue, right? And that would always be my guidance and my feedback after that portion of my responsibility and the due diligence would say, I can't, in any sort of good faith, recommend investing in this organization because I have no clue how they're getting the revenue. Is it all digital, all word of mouth, all alumni? Um, I just don't know. I don't know what's proper. So from attracting investment, um, it's a must. I think that's absolutely a must. I would say also from the investment side of things, I've seen decks where, in particular, one always stood out. Whereas call volume increased, conversion and admissions decreased for that center, and it was the easiest thing to spot on a graph over the course of a 12, 18-month span. And so when I was able to go back and say, here's what I see, if we hire one more admissions person, their revenue is going to go up X, and it's going to be a really good investment right off the jump because they're going too lean, and this is very easy for us to go and fix pretty quickly. So for me, on an investment, having that data there is really a must. It also shows, to your point, Sean, the seriousness of the business. If you have all your KPIs, all your data, and all your processes and flows in the front end easily visible, or at least easily reachable. If I can request, hey, I need to see what percentage of referrals from outreach reps come from interventionists. If you can pull that in a couple hours, that's good, fine. That's awesome stuff. So I dig that. Expansion across multiple facilities too. That's a really complex discussion when it comes to tech stacks. But the short of it would be, I think that scalability and cross regionality of outreach reps is we're seeing more and more. And what I mean by that is treatment providers who are platform providers having overlapping um, reps in the same territory for different product lines or different treatment lines within their same system. It's impossible to navigate that without a functioning CRM. It's truly impossible to function. Even programs that have decent CRMs find it very difficult to navigate that line because they haven't quite attributed those things properly. So I see that as still a challenge. One trend I would like to see more of, and this is actually something that Chris and I are really passionate about here, is outcomes-based marketing strategies. And so by utilizing the EMR, by utilizing CRM, by utilizing outcome studies, being able to take the data of who your treatment center is best at treating and then pushing that back to front-end marketing practices and creating a cycle of improvement, constant progressive improvement of patient acquisition, who you treat best, treating them best, and evaluation, and so on. And that, I think, is probably one of the bigger next stages for the behavioral health industry in particular, is making that a common practice. It's a necessity if value-based care really takes hold. But right now, I think is more of a competitive advantage versus a necessity. However, the necessity is not really far off.
Awesome. Thank you. You mentioned specifically like figuring out who you treat best. You mean something like specialization as far as the type of facility, right?
Yeah, so let's say you think you have a young adult males program, right? And you've built it out, like the physical facility of it, the structure of the programs, the experiential treatment, all that is built out with that in mind. But then you get the outcomes back. It says, you know what, actually, we do best with 44 through 55 males. Well, you have a decision to make, right? Do we now pivot our strategy? Do we retrain our therapists and clinical team to do better with young adult males? How do you pivot off that, right? But you wouldn't know that unless you had the actual data built in there and you had the way of tracking the patient life cycle from point of first entry to 18 months, 12 months post treatment. So I find that very fascinating. I think that's a really great next step we could all take.
Awesome. I really appreciate that insight. It sounds like that's not only a smart decision from like a business perspective, but also being or providing the best care you can for your patients. You know, let somebody else who handles the different groups, different like care settings, etc., handle those, and you can really focus on the people that you can help the most because we each have limited time.
Yeah, providing the best care you can is a great business strategy for sure.
Yep.
And Chris, I know I didn't really touch on digital experience, so I'll punt that to you.
Sure. We'll make it super quick. I think emphasis on digital and the expansion across multiple facilities. There's a lot of, you know, it's a very intertwined concepts, because there's a lot of facilities, I think, that a very small CRM, a very small CTM, or a dynamic call tracking system, or EHR, is appropriate, right? You've got one facility, maybe an IOP on top of that. But as soon as you start to hit 2+ facilities, it becomes very difficult for a bootstrapped, very small tech stack to handle the growth. And that's why I'm always really emphatic on making sure that let's build this out like we're going to grow, because that's what we're going to do. These tools are going to give us the ability to grow. And when you get it right the first time, it's a lot easier to scale. We can duplicate instances, we can integrate facilities, everything becomes so much smoother. And you think about, um, it's something that I think a lot of providers, when they're opening new facilities, don't really think about. And it ends up becoming a discussion, 2 to 3 weeks before an opening, like, oh my gosh, we have to build out our Salesforce instance or expand our instance and do all this. But if you're focused on growth from the get-go and you build out that tech stack on day one, it makes everything incredibly easier. Not only for the business, but also for the patients. If you have a tech stack that is constantly glitching out, right? That if your phones aren't working properly, if your admissions team doesn't know how to transfer, or when they transfer, things drop, or when somebody is dispositioned and their records don't move the way they should, that's arguably a barrier to entry for a patient. So your tech stack directly affects how your potential clients make it into your system.
Yeah.
Awesome. I really appreciate those insights. As far as optimizing your practice goes, I guess the two of you have a lot of insights for CRM. I know we've discussed quite a bit when we've met in person, when we've met over Zoom, how to leverage your tech stack for optimization. We've talked about visibility, reporting, automations. If you want to jump into some experiences you've had with clients, obviously without giving too much details, on how much like leveraging their tech stack as far as like data reporting, automation, workflows goes, has really increased revenue for them, that would be great.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of one in particular without spilling any sort of beans. So I would start with this, and I'm not going to call anyone in particular, but the last bullet point here: using automation to reduce admin burden, increase client engagement. One of the things that's pretty interesting about behavioral health is how we spend money for people to call us, and then once they are deemed closed lost in the system, that's it. That's the last of the conversations, and we spend more money for someone else to call us. Well, that person had a really good interest, right? They had a really good reason, and engaging that person with automated drip campaigns through email, text. There's a lot of different strategies, obviously, use that. But if your organization has content creation to any sort of degree, and you have the ability to set up a drip campaign and work through that stage, you start capturing those folks again. And from a optimization standpoint, your cost per acquisition goes down as that drip campaign works and people keep coming in, and it's really, really effective. I think that's one of those things where we can show that improvement, increase client engagement. And then to Chris's point earlier, alumni is the same thing. You have all their information through the CRM. And what I dig about y'all, Sean, is having the CRM and EMR in one organization. You can then be smart with your contact, right? You know different information that you might not know otherwise, of not just the patient engagement journey from how they found you to how they admitted, how long it took. You now have length of stay, drug of choice. You can then go to outcomes and base it fractionally based off of those certain different things you can slice up. It's all really a fascinating way to take that information and choose your journey of how to re-engage patients just like ones you've treated. So without having that integration, you just can't do it.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the call out, Steve, with our integrated CRM and EMR together.
Well, sure. I mean, it just makes things simpler and communicate better. So, as someone who implements these things, that's something that I dig. I know an organization makes easier, doesn't happen often, so I dig that. And then I would just say on the other side, reporting that drives strategic growth. We have an organization that we've worked with where Chris absolutely crushed it with his SEO and website redesign, where calls tripled over the course of about 5 or 6 months. And if we had no clue of calls, call time, call volume, like the peak times, et cetera, that organization would have challenges staffing and fielding those calls, right? And so we're now able to understand all of the ways of best maximizing their actual intake team so that they can take all the call volume increases and do it at a more cost-effective way, but scaling properly.
It makes me think, it just spurred this on, but, talking about strategic growth, one thing that happens when you've got a super, CTM, CRM, EHR, like functioning foundation, one thing that you can do is a lot of people think that these marketing leads, digital marketing leads, where they come from PPC, SEO, social, paid social, etc., they come in and, they can be marked, clinically inappropriate or financially inappropriate. And Steve mentioned it, like a lot of the times those just go, that's it. When they're not appropriate, that's it. Well, the money has been spent to bring that individual to the door, right? To bring them into the admissions department. One thing that you can do when you've got a really solid, foundation is you can start to take this data and start to really manage your refer outs, right? And I'm going to let Steve, because Steve's the BD master, um, uh, delve more into this. But you essentially have taken these what would have been thought of historically as lost digital revenue, right? That you can't do anything with, but now you're providing a facility that does provide services for who may not be clinically or financially appropriate for you. Providing, you're referring them to them. You're building a relationship with another program that can then be reciprocated. If they happen to have individuals that are financially or clinically appropriate for your program, and you can very easily track and manage those relationships with the CRM. So, to kind of bring it back to digital marketing, right? Digital marketing may have brought those leads in. So you're essentially, saving a significant amount on those leads because ultimately they are converting.
Yeah, good example of this years ago, back when I had brown hair in that original picture. Even before that, when I had more of the brown hair, I was in the field with an organization, and we switched to a CRM that actually gave us visibility. The prior CRM had no visibility, and it turns out there was a account that we referred 52 patients to the year prior. And I was able to go to that account and say, hey, I didn't know if you know this, but we referred 52 people to you last year, one a week. We haven't received anything back from you. I didn't know if you wanted to build a relationship where you can refer people to us. That might make sense. And their direct answer was, no, I don't. So, okay. I'm a firm believer you refer to the place as the best clinical fit for the patient. However, all things equal, you then can find someone who can work with you and have that trusting business relationship. And it's far more in depth than just trading Atlas for blues or anything. I'm not a fan of that. But in this instance, it was okay, let's find someone who in your market, I find the same amount or more of faith and trust in, and we're going to partner with them. And for our organization, it ended up adding a couple more admits a month to us, which ended up adding a couple $100,000 more a year of revenue, which that visibility paid for the entire CRM go live and training and maintenance for that year alone, just by that one account. So, there were probably about 30 people in the field. I can only imagine the revenue bump just from that change in visibility.
I appreciate that insight. It's definitely good to see that how that data flows and where your referrals are going, just because you want to make sure that your patients are going to people who you trust, right? Not just, whomever. You know that this particular practice has clinicians that really care about their patients. So Now we'll open up for question and answers. I know we've only got a few people here, but if you have questions, now's the time. We can take the time to discuss. Again, Chris and Steve, I really appreciate your insights here. You guys are really the experts as far as the holistic growth goes. We just do the tech stack, but I think that you guys have awesome stories, and it's been a delight having you join us today.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate it. And it's a very interesting topic. I think that as programs progress and get more and more insight, it turns into a snowball. And it's kind of hard to walk through that all on a 45-minute, hour-long webinar. But as you see, we've seen over and over again, programs go live with a new CRM, EMR, get visibility, start improving on it, and have that constant progressive improvement of their data collection and then their action on it, and have a very intentional action on that. They're the ones who I think are the competitive ones in the market now. They're the ones who are really truly growing quickly and able to scale. And it's fun. It's just fun to watch because you know that that's making better decisions and more effective decisions.
You know, being a marketing guy and having the chance to work in and around a lot of, you know, both small and large organizations in behavioral health, it's always fun to see, you know, this is just, you know, doting on digital marketing. It's always fun to get those metrics behind the work because a lot of it feels very abstract, and it can feel even more abstract to potentially leadership. So when you come to the boardroom with data and metrics that are pulled from your CRM uh, and your EHR and your, you know, your dynamic call track, it just makes the conversation around marketing so much more fruitful and less about, well, I don't like the color green or I don't like the verbiage we used here. When you have that sort of data mindset, it completely removes that from the discussion. It's like, well, here's what's working and here's what's not working. It doesn't matter if I like the color green or orange for the button on the CTA. Purple is what's working. So we're going to make everything purple. You know, it makes a lot of those, um, which can become very unnecessarily intense conversations, very to the point and very like, hey, let's become more efficient. Let's make decisions faster. And let's get, you know, the people, let's get them the help that they need faster.
So we just saw a question come in from Mariano. They said, where do you think the focus will be in the following 5 years when it comes to the behavioral health industry?
Um, I know this is probably on the nose, but I think that is going to be a huge focus on tech integration. I know that's what we're here to talk about, but healthcare in general and behavioral healthcare, I think, have historically fallen a little bit behind when it comes to utilizing tech. I think that a lot of programs are going to hustle to kind of hop on the bandwagon, as they should, to using automation. You know, we already run pretty lean as an organization or as an industry. Like it's a pretty lean industry. And the only way to run leaner is to lean in to things like automation, you know, workflows through your CRM and making sure that there's a lot of investment and focus on those platforms so you can move faster and you can be more nimble.
Yeah, I would just add, kind of expand on that, Mariano. I think George would say is AI, and I can get down with that as well. So for sure, I think that's definitely something that we're going to see more and more of. And we get the question a lot about, you know, should you use AI for chat or for phone part of things? I'm still not completely comfortable with that, just due to the fact that we have crisis moments that I don't feel that AI is completely suited for. And if there is a tragic event, then an AI fielded that from the life loss part is going to be awful, absolutely. But the part of it from the PR blowback of that treatment center could have saved that person's life, and they used AI to be cheap. That doesn't jive with me. So I can't recommend that to clients yet. But I think in the next 5 years was your question. We'll probably see more of that. I also sincerely believe we're in a phase of sophistication for business acumen within the behavioral healthcare industry over the next 5 years. We've been the Wild West for a very long time. We've seen large organizations grow and thrive with being sound business practices. And we still see a lot of people who are wildly passionate about recovery, open treatment programs, and try to bootstrap it for years and decades. And that just isn't flying anymore with the reimbursement rates and the length of stays and the patient financial responsibilities and all these things that are being pushed from the financial side of things. You can't be successful by accident like you could 10 years ago. And so I think when you're going to see the treatment centers are just going to get slightly more sophisticated in every aspect of what they do. It's not really along the lines of tech stack, but tech stack's clearly going to be part of it because insurance is coming back saying, hey, how did our patients do? And then people are going, I don't know. So like you need these things pretty effectively. But I think the next 5 years, you are going to see AI used for better and worse. And I think you're going to see a incrementally improved sophistication of our space.
And it looks like she asked a follow-up question about, the biggest point of resistance. Me being in digital marketing, and I might have a different viewpoint of that, but I think that the biggest point of resistance is just knowledge around how fast technology moves, and it's hard for executives to keep up. It's hard enough for us to keep up on the ground floor, right? It's 2025. I believe that's what year it is. It's 2025. And, I know marketing departments are still having to struggle to showcase the effectiveness of social media as a viable platform when it's been proven to be a viable platform for 10 to 15 years. So I think that a lot of it is knowledge base, right? Like, as Steve mentioned, as the executives start to become more business savvy, I think that that's where a lot of that resistance is going to come from, is that kind of proving the case that why do we need this? Why do we need this tech stack? But then also on the other side of the table, understanding why it is necessary.
Awesome. I appreciate the two of you answering those questions for us. It looks like no more questions have come in, so wanted to thank you, Mariano. For anybody who's viewing live, of course, you can find us at these websites, opusehr.com for us at Opus, or growthsherpaconsulting.com for Steve and Chris. And of course, anybody that's watching the recording, you're welcome to find us there as well. But thank you all for joining. It's been great having the two of you and everybody who joined live. But we'll let you get back to the rest of your day. Have a good one.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much.